Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation. I really enjoyed this conversation with multimedia performance artist, actor, and musician Perry Young. Perry is best known as Father Jun in the HBO series Warrior and fan favorite Ping Wu in Steven Soderberg's Cinemax show, The Knick. He was the founder of the Asian American performance collective SLANT Performance Group and is also a traditionally trained Japanese shakuhachi flute craftsman and musician. We discuss his passion for the arts, learning to listen, and address systemic racism in the United States. It is an honor to have guests like Perry on the show. I truly enjoy these conversations and hope you do too. If you do, please share this podcast with others and rate it on your platform of choice. You can also take one extra step to show your love by donating to the show on my website, culturechatpodcast.com, or on patreon.com/sifumimichan. You can donate as little as $1 per month. It goes a long way, and I appreciate the support. For comments or suggestions, email me at mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or reach out on social media at sifumimichan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Perry. Thank you so much for joining me on Culture Chat today.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yes, well, it's an honor to have you on. I'm a fan of your work, and it's great that you've taken some time to sit down and chat with me about all fun things that's going on in the world.
Well, thank you. It's always an opportunity to share, and it's a privilege. Again, thank you for doing what you're doing.
I appreciate that. And it's interesting. We were talking a little bit off air and how we were able to get connected. And it's been such a crazy year with COVID-19, and we're all like living in, I think it's changing, but in isolation. And we're in these like quarantine bubbles, and we're pulled back from what our norm is. But in this wonderful way, you and I were able to connect through people we know all the way across the country. And you're in New York and I'm in Florida. And so we're not really alone. We do still have, that human connection, which I think is so important and kind of remarkable if you think about it.
Right. I think in this time and age, technology does allow us to connect with other people. I mean, when I think about what my teenagers are going through now, it's such a different time than, I was alive before the cell phone, before and my teenagers like to say, oh, you were around before electricity.
You're like, thanks a lot.
But so much has happened to society in the last 20 years because of the smartphone and internet. You can literally have friends that you've never met before in another culture, in another country. And, these forums and chat groups and stuff, it really allows us to create bonds with people we've never met before, offers opportunities for us to, tickle different parts of our brain.
Mm-hmm.
The downside of that, of course, is you might not go out to meet people in person.
Mm-hmm.
So, but, like you said, in this time of pandemic, when we're isolated and we don't have another option, this is a pretty good option.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to just pick your brain for a second because I'm a teacher, and so I often work with teenagers as well, and I get the same thing as you, where they think you're kind of a dinosaur because I still have a cassette player in my car, so.
Wow.
So yeah, I know it's vintage. I like to call it like vintage, it makes it sound cooler. But do you also find like communication is very different because teenagers communicate by text and acronyms, and the way we communicate has also changed. And you being a performance artist and, relying on so many different facets of communication, how have you kind of seen that kind of evolve, I guess, in the last decade or so?
Well, I mean, communication is sort of key to happiness, I think, for one's experience in the world. If you can truly communicate, and I think true is, again, another subjective thing, like how do you reach out and connect with another human being on a level that enhances your life? So I think that a lot of things that makes my work successful as a musician and an actor is how to listen. And if I can actually absorb and hear what another person is saying, I can respond authentically and in a realistic manner that's not just rote, responses. As an actor, when I learned my lines, I realized that I have to listen every time to the actor giving me the thing so that I can respond authentically with these lines that I remembered. And if I don't actually hear what they're saying, I'm not going to respond authentically. And then that, the work suffers from that.
Mhm.
So I think it all comes down to being able to listen and practice listening and understand what listening really means. How does it
Mhm.
affect you when you hear something?
Yeah, I love that you just shared that. And I've been doing this podcast now for over 4 years, and one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that I need to just shut up and listen. Because I can be a little chatty, but it has been very enlightening and eye-opening that if you just kind of stop thinking in your head while someone else is speaking, because I've had to learn to be able to really not jump to the next, subject. And it's a very lifelong lesson that I think is ongoing and that I can always hone and tune. And I think what you just shared through your craft is remarkable because it gives you an opportunity to, come at it from a different angle. And I really want to talk to you about your craft of musicianship because I wasn't as aware of that. Of course, I know you as an actor, and I'm fascinated by the fact that you not only play the flute, but you craft as well, and that you do this Zen meditation. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I think that is something we all need a little bit more of, and especially these challenging times.
Right. We're talking about specifically the shakuhachi Japanese Zen flute, and
Mhm.
it's a flute that its origins are quite unknown, but it comes from the temples of Japan with the Zen Buddhist monks called the Fukkei sect, and they're known for these sort of baskets over their head, and it sort of masks their identity, and so they're called the komuso, and they're quite an esoteric sort of or little known sect of Buddhism, and they play these flutes for meditation. They're not music. They don't play the flute in a concert setting where other instruments of Japan have come from for like centuries ago. This flute comes just from meditation, and they don't really know how the music was even formed, but it is based on breathing, inhaling deeply and exhaling long exhalations, which is the basis for meditation in a lot of schools. So you inhale quickly and you exhale a long exhalation, and so in the exhalation you play a phrase of music, and then there's a beat where you inhale quickly and you play another long exhalation. I found that when I studied this type of playing, that it really chilled me out. The side product was it's not just music, but I actually feel great when after I play, you
Mhm.
know. And before I started playing shakuhachi, I thought I was a chill guy already, but afterwards I became more chill. So I can really tell you, it's sort of you could see it in your life. Things just are better. You start to see the light differently. You start to hear nature differently because it teaches you not only is it based on breathing, but the music and the long exhalations fades into the natural environment that you're in.
Mhm.
So you sort of play music with your natural environment. And this is something that the contemporary composer John Cage took from the Zen flute, was that you play with nature. Nature is music. So I started to hear everything that happened, whether it was a bus that went by or the wind that blew, as part of music that I relate to. And that really connected me to the immediate. You are right here, right now. There's nothing else more important than this moment. And so if you can absorb and understand all of that, it just makes your life so much richer. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that basically, that I just got addicted to making, because when I started, I couldn't afford a shakuhachi. This was pre-internet. So I learned how to make one by copying the flutes of the musician Yukio Tsuji, who I worked with at La Mama Theater. He was the pit musician in the show called Oedipus,
Okay.
and I was Oedipus. And
Oh.
I just, this was pre-internet. I couldn't find a shakuhachi, so I started copying his instruments. And over time, he told me that, wow, you're making good flutes. You should go to Japan if you want to get any better. And so I applied for grants, and I went to Japan.
Wow.
Next thing you know, I was studying under a master maker and player. I didn't
Mhm.
speak Japanese. He didn't speak English, but we learned it a traditional way where you just
Mhm.
absorb, in
Yeah.
an organic way. It's oral tradition. You just listen to the master and you
Mhm.
absorb. And that's another way of listening that was like, Americans ask too many questions. Just
Mhm.
listen, and you'll learn.
Right. Well, as a traditional martial artist, that really resonates with me
Mm.
because it's less about the words you're using and like the actions and the body language and everything you just explained was so beautiful. How did you kind of start with even wanting to learn that? Because you mentioned you were in the theater, and did you always play the flute, or were you always musical, or like how did you kind of find yourself to actually having that interest in the first place?
Well, about that time, I had already been wanting to sort of decolonize the Eurocentric part of my, brain. So I
Hmm.
was looking at, I was a musician. I played rock and roll, I played guitar, and it was mostly sort of like, punk rock, heavy metal.
Hmm.
And um, my reasoning at the time for liking that music was that, the white people stole it from the blacks anyway. And
Hmm.
so my liking of black music and blues was like, I like that part of rock and roll and where it came from, the origins. So I wanted to learn another instrument that because music is a way, is like art. You really understand yourself. It's a way of self-contemplation and reflection. And I wanted something that was rooted in Asian culture. And so when I heard the flute in Oedipus, I went, you know what? That thing just changed my world. It was so rich and organic and unlike any sort of Eurocentric music that I've heard.
Hmm.
So different. It wasn't organized with rhythm and the same pitches and scale. It was textural. What I found out was Asian music is very textural. It's not harmonic,
Hmm.
based or rhythm or melody based as much as it is textural. So that just opened up my brain to another way of absorbing music and understanding culture. And I thought it was a great way to discover my Asianness in sort of opening up my mind to something that was, I just have to like look to my ancestors. And
Hmm.
there it was.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And can you share a little bit about what that experience was like in Japan? How long were you there? And then, I mean, it's just full immersion, really, because like you said, you didn't even speak Japanese. And, there's so many different barriers we as humans put up and why we can't do something. Well, I can't speak the language, so why would I do this? Or I don't like the food, or there's always barriers, but it's like you kind of just did the full, which is says the best way to, if you want to learn
Mhm.
about a culture, is a full immersion. And I think you went all in there.
I absolutely. I always think immersion is a great, especially for language, because then
Mhm.
you really have to go outside of your box and your safety zone and see what you're made of, and you have to. It's sink or swim when it's immersion.
Yeah.
So it was full immersion, and it kind of it. I think of it as like a life hack
Mhm.
because I went into another country and I suddenly realized that, if I use life hack in terms of an analogy to a computer or software, if my
Mhm.
life was my operating system and all the apps that I was using, all the software I was using from America didn't work anymore.
Mhm.
So I had to go and download new apps from Japan and absorb them and understand how they work. And suddenly I start to realize, hey, my old apps weren't working that good, Like I saw that the Japanese have so much more respect for tradition. Something Americans don't understand because we
Mhm.
don't have a long tradition and we're not. I mean, our tradition in terms of our Eurocentric history goes back to Europe,
Mhm.
but we as Americans don't really want to identify with that, or we won't admit to it. But all the classical arts are, the opera and philharmonics, it's all Eurocentric things. But so going to Japan, they can go back 3,000 years
Mhm.
and you know understand every step of the way to where they got to today, and they respect people who carry on the tradition. So my teacher, who was a shakuhachi maker, as obscure as that was, once people found out that he was a shakuhachi maker, they would just stop and kind of like absorb that moment and go, wow, this person is carrying on tradition. He has a whole different respect, you know.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then when I told people in Japan I was studying shakuhachi, they would just stop and their jaws would drop. And they were like, oh my God, they would bow to me. Thank you for doing
Oh.
that. You don't have anything like that in America. I mean, the closest thing you could say that would be true indigenous culture would be indigenous Native American basket
Mhm.
weaving or
Mhm.
flute making or the powwow dances. So
Mhm.
if you were studying that, people would just like, oh my God,
Mhm.
that's our origins,
Yes, yes.
so that was just the understanding that people of the respect that the Japanese people have towards their cultural their culture was so deep. It was so deep that I think that until you see it and in action, Americans won't be able to understand what that
Hmm.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with you 100%. Was your teacher like, I'm having this vision of this like Zen master, and was he like very strict, or was it very like, coming from a martial background, in my mind, like my traditional sifu and so and so and so and so, in my mind, it's a very different environment than the my students get in the American setting. While we do try to maintain tradition, like my image of what the great grandmasters were like is very vivid. And so, but in something like Zen, the shakuhachi, am I saying it right? I apologize if I'm butchering it, but
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
what is the dynamic like between the teacher and the student?
Well, I was very fortunate that I had, by the time I went to Japan, I had studied in America somewhat. And my first teacher was Ronnie Selden, and then I had Brian Ritchie, who's a rock musician with the Violent Femmes, who plays
Mm,
shakuhachi. And then I
really?
met, yeah, and then I met Ralph Samuelson, who was one of the first Americans who went to Japan to study. And through Ralph, I met Kinya Sogawa in Japan, who I studied with, who was my teacher and the
Mm,
player of a certain style called Dokyoku. So because Ralph introduced me to Kinya, he said I had other teachers to look at through the grant that people would introduce me to.
mhm,
But Ralph said, Kenya's a very special person because he's married to an American and he has a different way of being than other people in Japan might have.
mhm,
So once I met Kenya, I went, yeah, this is the guy because as although he was steeped in tradition and respect for the instrument, he also was lived outside of the box as a musician and artist. In Japan, the culture can be so restrictive that people want to leave Japan because of that.
mhm.
They
Yeah.
want to come to America because of the
Right.
freedom. So, but Kenya, because he married an Asian woman, sorry, an American woman, Lori Sagawa, he had a different sort of international, a worldly aspect about him that allowed him to share differently, even though his respect for the culture or his way of sharing the culture was still very traditional. So there was something really fun about him. And when I was there, I traveled to Japan meeting with other makers. Some of those makers were very stoic, very guarded, and very
Mm,
traditional. So it's like if you were to study with me, it'd be like black and white,
mhm.
and it was very like, oh, well, that's not so fun, you know. Although it could be teaching me a lot at the same time, but there was something about Kenya that told me it was a kindred spirit. There
Mhm.
was a lot of curiosity, creativity, childlike, wondrous awareness about him. So it was just spirit. I gravitated toward his spirit, and he was a fun guy, strict, but I learned a lot.
Mhm. Wow. I often ask a question about, I've talked to different artists, I've talked to athletes, and I'm like, what is kind of your practice before you get on stage to perform or right before a game? And I imagine that your meditation is a big part of your pre-performance routine.
It can be, especially
Mhm.
when I'm going on film or TV, because you have to really relax, and
Mhm.
everything on film and TV shows up in your face right away. So
Mhm.
a lot of different actors, I mean, every actor has ways of calming down, clearing the
Right.
palette, making it a blank canvas and doing the work. So I found that I take the shakuhachi with me to work on film when I'm shooting in the trailer because it really just centers you.
Mhm.
If I'm going on a stage for live performance, especially if it was with my theater group SLANT, things that are more raucous and more energetically crazy, or with La Mama Theater,
Mhm.
that's more spectacle based, I might do something different. I might jump, do a physical exercise,
I
jump
see.
around, scream, to get the
Right,
energy
right.
going. So yeah, so the different performances that you do kind of dictates what the kind of pre-show work that I need to do.
I see, I see. And when you do the shakuhachi, are there like sets that's done? Is it a certain amount of time, or what is that practice like? Because I'm just so unfamiliar and fascinated by it.
Mm. Well, everyone's different. The shakuhachi really is just a piece of bamboo with
Hmm.
5 holes in it. There's no keys. It's not like very specialized, violin or piano. Although it could be, actually, I take that back about violin, but it's not like a piano or a guitar or a drum where
Mhm.
it's just keys and you hit it and it makes a sound.
Mhm.
It's something that's organic. You kind of blow into it and it gives you back what you put into it,
Mhm.
at every single degree, whether it's a very soft breath, it gives you a soft voice back. You blow harsh, it screams back at you, so you listen to this thing, you have a conversation with it, it talks to you, it tells you if you're nervous because this tone is going to be wavering or it's going to be
Mhm.
solid. So if I'm going into an audition, actually I've taken it with me to auditions, you just blow a couple of notes and then those notes will tell you if you're centered or not,
Mhm.
because if the
Mhm.
note is weak and wavery, your breathing is not solid. You're not
Mhm.
solid, So it might take a few breaths to like focus yourself. It might take a minute. It might take 5 minutes. And
Yeah.
it depends on your own mind that day. But I found that the shakuhachi is just like the perfect mirror. It just tells you what's happening.
Yeah, I love that connectivity between being able to audibly hear how
Mm.
your breath is, because of course, as a martial artist, and breathing is a really big part of it, and there's different things you do physically if you're feeling, but I love the fact that you can really have this wonderful like audible cue to basically tell you, okay, you need to like dig deeper, or you need to calm down, or I think that's really remarkable. So I want to of course talk to you about the wonderful show Warrior, which of course you play such a different character than that sits across from me right now. And
Yeah.
it's funny that you said, "Oh, I'm really mellow and I'm really chill." And yeah, your character, of course, on the wildly entertaining show is very different. And I often find that though when I meet artists that of course you're not exactly like the character you portray. But in addition to being wildly entertaining, I found that it was sad that a show set in the 1870s portrays so many issues that are still so relevant and ongoing today. And as another Asian American, what kind of was that like to not just get the script but then kind of play out a lot of that historical context, and then seeing all the dissonance that we're having now?
Well, it was a dream. It is a dream to be a warrior,
Mhm.
because this warrior will live on whether we get a new season or not, because it's
Yeah.
just a historical show. It's like Kung Fu, even though David Carradine played, a
Mhm.
Chinese person. It's so popular because it represents a certain kind of aspect of American history
Mhm.
that was never shown. Even David Carradine's Kung Fu showed all the racism in
Mhm.
America, you know, and so Warrior, the way that it addresses our true authentic history is going to be a talking point in a lot of Asian American or people of color ethnic studies classes in universities and colleges. I feel when I first studied Asian American history at San Francisco State University, I took an Asian Americans in the Mass Media class.
Mhm.
This was in the 80s. There wasn't a lot of stuff to talk about in terms of Asian Americans in the mass media,
Yeah.
Hollywood and film. We could analyze things that came out in the 60s and 70s, like, Fu Manchu movies
Mhm.
and things like that. Breakfast at Tiffany's, those
Oh,
historically
right. Yeah.
bad stereotypes that came from
Mhm.
Hollywood. But there was almost nothing that was positive. So
Yeah.
now that we have something like Warrior, I think back, oh my God, if my class had this to talk about, it'd
Mhm.
be so inspiring,
Yeah.
because now we finally have Hollywood telling our stories in an authentic way that can address social change, because we're actually talking about systemic institutionalized racism that America is built on. And
Mhm.
these are things that the African American community and the Latinx community has talked about and addressed in their media for decades.
Yeah.
But Asian Americans are behind because we don't have those numbers of support. We don't have the producers. We don't have the audience to say, I want to hear those things.
Mhm.
So, it took a while for the anti-Asian violence to really get news coverage.
Yes.
We had to scream for it. It took,
Mhm.
I would say, 8 months of
Yes.
violence, before
Yes.
before CNN and the president really spoke out. Of course, our president,
Our president now, yeah.
it's so night and
Yeah,
day,
it's
right?
like
Night and
another
day. So
world.
we had one president who incited the violence and
Mhm.
reignited the violence towards Asian Americans, and then the other who's making signed an executive order to stop it. So
Hmm.
it's like night and day. But going back to your original question, I think Warrior is an incredible show that addresses the history of America and systemic racism. So it allows people to talk about it in a real way.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, being American, right? From first generation from immigrants, right? I see why my parents fought so hard to be here, and having kind of pride in my heritage of my Asian culture, but of course, being proud to be an American. It's this almost this conflictive thing sometimes because I've found as I've gotten older that what I learned in school wasn't correct. You always presume you're learning everything in school properly. Like if it was taught in school, it was right, and that, like you said, with the African American culture and with especially Asian American being, so close for us, like you don't hear or get taught about the internment camps in, the Japanese internment camps. You don't really get taught about enough about slavery, and so we don't get to hear about the Chinese Exclusion Act. I am embarrassed over the fact that it took so long for me to really delve deeper and know what these things are, and to be able to actually cognitively and still not very expertly speak about it. But especially a show like Warrior, you're watching it and then it's that repetition of, wow, okay, this is still happening. Where people who are themselves immigrants or from immigrants are now criticizing and trying to stop other immigrants from having a life, having rights. They shouldn't vote, or they shouldn't have ownership of things. And it's a little bit sad. Like I said, I was saddened by the fact that I'm like, oh yeah, this is in the 1800s. And then you kind of fast forward and it's like, look at what you just mentioned. It took 8 months for the mainstream news to even mention the fact that there was all these hate crimes and all these things happening. And I know a big part of it, and props to Amanda Wen and Daniel Wu and Daniel Day Kim, who really helped publicize and, like you said, had to scream to be heard. It's just like, and a big part of it, and I think maybe a question I have for you is, as an Asian American, we are known to be the more docile and kind of calm, and we're not going to make waves. And maybe generationally, we've also been taught to be a little bit silent. Like, I'm not sure what the dynamic was for you growing up, but does that kind of play into why also it's taken so long?
Yes, everything you said is really important in terms of like how we're perceived as a more quiet and passive in America. I think in Asia, you know, being passive is part of a philosophy that's been around for, you know, 2,000 years to be able to get along with each other,
Hmm.
you know? So it's being passive is an active choice. It's like, you know, in a Confucianist way, they told you that you have to obey your elders to in order to get along, you know? So if we all agree with those things, then we can get along in some ways, even though it has this downside. I think that um, being passive is actually a very active thing, and it shouldn't be looked down as a negative way that I think
Hmm.
we see in Europe, in a European way. You know, we think that being active and aggressive and loud is the way to do it, but in Taoism, you got to have both. You have to have
Hmm.
the loud and the soft in order.
Hmm.
There's neither. So it's always about addressing how we decide to choose our battles. And
Hmm.
I think that one of the big battles right now was that we didn't decide that passive voice mostly. I think that it was something that was put upon Asians because because of that small amount of population. I think in the 60s and 70s, we were about 3% of the population. We were easily used by the government and the
Hmm.
mass media to say that to quell the big black voice that was asking for racial equality and
Hmm.
social equality and fighting for racial laws that can allow them to have equal housing, equal education, equal job opportunities. If they said, look at that 3% of Asians, they're so nice and
Hmm.
quiet,
Hmm.
they're the model minority.
Hmm.
You guys don't need everything that you're demanding. If you just behave like them, you'll be fine. You know, we didn't have the voice to speak up, but if you if you actually study Asian American history in the 60s, 50s even, we were quite loud. Asian Americans were aware of
Hmm.
the, you know, the racism and disproportionate laws and things like that,
Yeah.
segregation. We were segregated. You can look at photos and find photos of Asians marching with Black Panthers. You
Hmm.
have Yuri Kochiyama building bridges with Malcolm X, and um, Grace Lee Boggs, you know, marrying God, Boggs, I can't remember the first name of her husband, and
Hmm.
working for Blacks' rights in Detroit. So Asian Americans were actually quite loud. But as you said, history is the story of the victors. They don't want to tell you that story. They don't want people of color to bond. Instead,
Hmm.
they made laws, anti-segregation, anti-miscegenation laws, to prevent people of color from marrying, getting together.
Hmm.
You know, that's to divide and conquer. So these are machinations of the government and the larger white supremacist society in general. Although there was no like one single meeting, I think
Hmm.
these institutions adopted that, agreed,
Yeah.
accepted it on a subconscious level. And I think, you know, we're being louder today because we know that it's survival. You
Hmm.
have to be loud in America. You have to adopt an American, a European way of operating to sort of, you know, the loudest wheel will get the oil. You know,
Hmm.
the loudest squeaking wheel will get the oil here in America.
Hmm.
So it's a different playing field, and I think that we're finally getting that voice.
Yeah. It's been really interesting to see as well, because I've been hopeful when I see the support for all the different organizations, like you said, the different interracial organizations kind of coming together. And then the frustrating part is like seeing that intentional division, right, where they want us to be like angry at one another, and because they fear this whole you know, I find it crazy because we are a country of immigrants, right? Like everybody here is a meld of another culture, and which is why when I watched the TV show, I was just seeing like the hate and the anger of like these immigrants aren't allowed to be here, even though it's just the hypocrisy, right? And so it's just so frustrating. But it has been a little bit hopeful in the last several weeks, seeing how much steam and things are going. So do you find that to be very different, because you've gotten to see several iterations of swells of, okay, we're kind of fighting for our rights now, and then we're kind of quieted down again, and like you said, this is to me very different in the way that last year, almost a year ago now, a little over, to the George Floyd murder, where I really felt like that might have been a bit of a turning point for our African American community. Like I've seen over and over and over and again so many things happening, but like to me there was like a little bit of a shift. Do you feel like this, with the elderly population being attacked and publicized, do you think this is like that turning point as well?
Yeah, I think that you know, first of all, just Trump coming into presidency um, politicized a lot of people,
Yeah.
brought a lot of people to action, and especially, and then with the pandemic, again, people went, hey, you know, like this, we really need to fight this guy because
Hmm.
people of color are dying because he's lying about the pandemic. So that was another bump up in terms of activism. And then with Asian Americans, we were experiencing a double pandemic, right? The
Hmm.
racism and the coronavirus.
Yeah.
And so it took, for me, it took the grandmother, the 89-year-old
Mm-hmm.
grandmother in Brooklyn being set on fire to say, okay, enough is enough. You
Hmm.
know, I was already vocal. I've been an activist all my life, but then I had to kick it up to another level
Yeah.
because people were asking me, fans were asking me that can Father Jun post something about this? You know, and
Hmm.
that's how when I realized the importance of Warrior, because Warrior offered strong representation of Asian images,
Hmm.
and we weren't going to take any crap. These
Hmm.
characters in Chinatown are not taking any crap, and that was true from the beginning. If you think about history, the
Hmm.
Tongs, the Tongs were formed to literally fight white people coming in to,
Hmm.
you know, and to lynch them.
Yeah.
And that's what Warrior addresses. And you know, the thing about Warrior is it does it in a beautiful artistic and entertaining way, where it takes people who might not normally be on the side of Asians, and get them on our side.
Hmm.
So I think that people are stepping up. I see that, so many people are posting and adopting, the image of the 91-year-old Thai grandfather that was
Yeah.
pushed to his death, that are not Asian. So
Mhm.
that's heartening, in the same way that we saw, the hashtag and movements, Asians for Black Lives, come up when George
Mhm.
Floyd was murdered.
Yep.
So we're starting to see how institutionalized racism is something that we have to address and stamp out like a virus. And it takes all aspects of our society, like the coronavirus. It's going to take
Mhm.
politicians, artists, educators, blue collar workers, white collar workers, mothers, fathers, everyone to educate and fight racism like we're fighting the pandemic, because it affects all of us.
Absolutely. So well said. And speaking of the pandemic, and obviously with the show, and things have been so tumultuous. And of course, we're going to post and remind everybody to keep asking to bring Warrior back so we can get more of this wonderful television. But how has that affected you kind of personally? Like, I usually like to check in with my guests over this last year. It's, you ask the question, like, how are you doing? And it's such a common thing, but really, like, how are you doing? Like, how has things been for you? You're in New York City, which has been one of the cities to me that has had the most change in terms of how you're able to operate and live, because it's such a different place. Like, I get in my car and I can be in a safe thing and drive around, and it's very different in New York. So how has that been for you, and how are you?
Yeah, that's a very complex question. That takes a long time to answer, but to cut it as succinctly as possible, I would say that I feel very grateful that I am alive, and that my family is safe, and that, it takes being educated and discussions with people on finding the right way to behave, because there is a wrong way to behave.
Hmm.
Things are subjective, right? In the world, reality and truth is subjective. But if you behave in a way that hurts others physically, that's the wrong way to behave. So
Hmm.
if you don't wear a mask and that hurts others, that's the wrong way to behave. So I'm lucky that I'm around intelligent people that can recognize those things, and we have good discussions about, being safe, because it's about family and caring for each other. And I found that if you live with gratitude, that it's a much better way to view the world. That if you
Hmm.
have everything you want, and you're lucky to be alive, and you appreciate your relationships and your friends, and the safety and food on the tables, because everyone else, or not everyone else, but some people have it so much worse.
Yeah.
And that, gratitude is one thing. So the other thing is that I have an art practice, and I always recommend to people, if you have an art practice, it could be martial arts, it could be a music instrument, it could be journaling,
Hmm.
that allows you to contemplate your feelings in a clear way. And even like, if you're a musician, you might not be contemplating intellectually in the terms of language, but your brain is working in a way to relieve stress through your music, or pottery making, or drawing.
Hmm.
That really helps with dealing with anxiety,
Hmm.
and that can easily come in this time. And it reminds you of, like, it's like self-care. You're giving yourself a massage when
Hmm.
you take self-care in any kind of a practice, like what I just said. So I'm able to luckily apply those things to live with less anxiety
Hmm.
than there could be.
Yeah.
um yeah.
Yeah, it's I have family in New York, and I know it has just been like a shock to the city, to the system, to the whole. I mean, obviously the whole world's going through a lot, but like I said, there's certain places, like I'm in Florida. I could drive out to the beach and get some sun and air and be away from people. I mean, I am so aware of how fortunate I am when I talk to my cousins in Canada who are stuck in the snow, and they're like, we've been in our house for months. It's, I go, oh, I'm sorry. Like you take little things like the sunshine for granted. It's so easy to do. And so I'm with you on the gratitude practice. In terms of your career, it's always inspiring to me to see, um, a long lasting career, and someone who's been able to thrive and been able to kind of keep pushing through, because I have a small understanding of the entertainment world and how how what's the word, frustrating, and having to be able to take no and
Mm,
rejection, and like a certain type of soul. It really does take a certain
mm.
type of soul to be able to overcome all these things. And so, kudos to you for always persevering in, whether it's through your flute work or on stage or on film. But what advice do you have to those people who wish to have kind of a long lasting career as yourself, and kind of to model after the good work that you're doing?
Well, do you mean specifically in the entertainment
Yeah, I
industry?
guess in the entertainment industry.
Yeah, so that's a rough one for a lot of people. I've read a lot of books when I came into it, and they all say if you could do something else, do something else.
Yeah.
So that's the first advice. Otherwise you spend the rest of your career like having anxiety and stress over whether you're going to get that job or not. You
Mhm.
know, and I just had an audition callback for a show I really liked,
Mhm.
and I was waiting for 4 days for them to hear it. And the advice on all these books is like, once you do the audition, let it go.
Yeah.
But after 30 years of doing it, I couldn't let it go.
Yeah.
So it's a lifelong practice of letting go, that you're
Mhm.
no matter what, it's always going to be there because of the way that our brain um, desires.
Mhm.
We have attachment and desire towards things.
Mhm.
And but I think that my the other advice, if somebody were to ask me as a young actor, what what should they do, I would say you have to really question your intention.
Mhm.
What's your intention to enter this field? Do you want to become a celebrity? Do you
Mhm.
want to have some kind of like star status? Do you want some acknowledgement for your work? Do you want to make money? All those are quite legitimate, and all those things are really strong desires in the entertainment industry. Um, I have those things also, but what got me through all that is, what is my true intention for being in this field, that if I continuously fail, I will still do it. And for that, I go to my hero, Bruce Lee, who said his intention is to show the beauty of the Chinese culture. So if I, as an actor, my face represents Asian culture on TV right away, is what I'm doing going to help the Asian culture in some way? And there's been some things that like I know won't help, so
Mhm.
I won't do those things. And sometimes opportunity happens when I think I can help change that box they wrote that character in. And
Mhm.
I would tell my manager to ask, would they let me do a line differently, change the
Mhm.
line, and they will say yes or no. And sometimes they've said yes, and I've changed the image of that character. So those things inspired me because I know that the industry is changing. When I first started acting for auditioning for TV and film in the 90s, there was nothing for Asian
Mhm.
American men, nothing. So 2017, we made Warrior, which is an amazing thing. And then we also saw Crazy Rich Asians,
Yep. Yeah.
Lost, and The Farewell,
Mhm.
and Better Luck Tomorrow, a
Yeah.
bunch of things that were
Was one of the
great.
first.
Yeah, so things are changing. I think you have to have something really clear, an intention that's not based on monetary value. If you can do things that enrich your soul, and you'll be happy if you don't make it, but also have a side job.
um, I'd love to hear more about the SLANT Performance Group as well, because your promotion of Asian American performance, and like what you just shared, is super inspiring. One, for anybody to be able to look up on the screen and feel represented is extraordinarily important and impacting. So thank you for the work that people don't see that you're doing, asking to change that line. I mean, a lot of people would just want to take the job, right? They'd be scared to ask. And I get that too. As a young actor, you get that you maybe don't feel like you have the creative license, but I have so much respect for your integrity and your desire to represent in such a positive way. So I would love to hear a little bit more also about the SLANT Performance Group.
Well, Slant started because I was having those experiences in TV and film where I would be in a room for an audition, and there'd be like 4 or 5 guys who look like me,
Hmm.
and after a while I knew them all,
Yeah, right. It's
and
the same
and
group.
it's the same group, and we're all talented people. We all work on in theater in New York City. They're
Hmm.
all extremely well trained, Juilliard and all this other, acting facility and sings for the opera, and then they go in for an AT&T commercial where they're riding a bike, and the white guy behind them, through Asia, and you're like, that's all they do. That's
Yeah.
all we get. That's all we
Yeah.
get. And so, based on that experience, you know, I, I, I decided with a group, Wayland Quintero, who's a Filipino American, and Richard Ebaharas, fifth generation Japanese, that we need to tell a story about Asians in America. And it has to be like, pan Asian, it has to be this diaspora. It's not just Chinese or Japanese or
Hmm.
Korean or Vietnamese, it's all of us.
Hmm.
So I got together with them because I met them through La Mama Experimental Theater Club, founded by the late great Ellen Stewart. That let's tell our own stories, the ones that nobody's writing about. Not even
Hmm.
Broadway, not even plays at the time, except for maybe David Henry Hwang. But even David was of a different generation, and
Hmm.
his stories were different. So what would Slant say, right? So we made a show called Big Dicks Asian Men,
Love it.
and the musical. So it was funny. It was about us. When we had our first meeting, we were like, okay, what would the three of us do? What would we say? What did the three of us have in common as Asian American men? And it came down to the degrading stereotype of us having little penises and emasculated by Hollywood.
Right.
But we had fun with it, and in writing and exploring and creating the show, it was really about deconstructing masculinity and pointing out toxic masculinity and all the
Hmm.
different levels of masculinity that is cages the human spirit. So we addressed all of those things in a really funny and humorous way, and it became a hit. We toured the country for 5 years with that show across
Wow.
New York to LA in every college campuses and alternative theater spaces. And there's, so it was so empowering to go out to all these little pockets throughout America in the middle of nowhere where there's an Asian American theater, not an Asian American student union in a
Hmm.
college who had money to bring us out.
Hmm.
And so we'd land, in Texas or Florida or Oklahoma and these little enclaves or just student groups, and we would find just people hungry for this voice. And so because of that, theater didn't pay. We were barely able to survive.
Yeah.
Asian American History Month is when we got booked the most.
Right. Right.
So we thought, man, why couldn't every month be Asian
Right.
American?
May needs to be like 6, 70, 80, 90 days longer.
Exactly. So we did it for 10 years because we knew
Wow.
the voice was there. The voice that wanted us was there. And then I had kids, and Waylon's parents were getting old, so he had to go take care of his parents in Hawaii. And so it was like we just have to survive now and go our own ways because this
Hmm.
wasn't a gig that was sustainable.
Hmm.
Even though when we were young, it was great. It was
Hmm.
amazing. It helped us um, um, give Asian America a voice and be
Hmm.
seen. And we started before the internet. People would
Right.
call us. People would call us and book us.
You mean on a phone?
Exactly. And we always thought like 10 years later was like, imagine if the internet was around when we
Yeah.
started. We would have been
Yes.
so much bigger.
Yeah.
But
I.
you know, it was a moment, and it was an amazing moment for us.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Um, like I mentioned, it's been such a busy year and it's kind of crazy. And for me, I like hyper focus on work, but I don't actually find that that's true focus. And I usually know that I have to do things like meditation and self care, all of the stuff that we've talked about. And obviously, I'm sure your Zen meditation and the flute practice and everything is what does keep you focused, but are there other things that helps you restore lost focus, or do you get lost focus, or are you just kind of because of your practice always in a nice plane?
I would love to think that it is. I would like to think that my practice keeps me constantly tuned up.
Okay.
But there are times when like I need a tune up, and what reminds me of that is just looking at my teens.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, they're going to be my greatest works. I don't want to reduce them to artwork, but as a lifelong artist, and many of my friends who are not parents, art is their most important work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the happiness and clarity of my children is going to be my most important work. And so I think that the limited time that I have on earth, I should be the most supporting person that they can, be, that can help them find their way in this incredibly complicated world that we live in. And if I could just plant some seeds that they'll water in their own lifetime of what true happiness can be for them, and fulfillment and ways to support and enrich their friends, so it's just they remind me of what's real. And
Mm-hmm.
that is connected to my inspiration of sharing the beauty of Chinese culture, which I said earlier, because that will help them too, as they see that what I do is for my community. So that I always think, in the Buddhist way, and in the way that Jesus has said, love thy neighbor, and help if you can, right? Those are real teachings. If we hold on to those teachings of love and support and giving is actually the best way to receive for me. Like I find that if I help people, it just feels so good
Mm-hmm.
without any other, even without the feeling I should just help people.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that is the quickest tune up.
Yeah.
How do you help people?
Absolutely. And we talked a lot earlier about tradition and maybe the lack of education of tradition. And I'm sure within your family, you have your own traditions. What are some that you'd be willing to share that, are really important to you and that you do pass down to the teens?
Well, I think the language of Cantonese,
Mm-hmm.
the language that I first spoke is important. Although,
Mm-hmm.
so when my kids were born, I spoke to them in Cantonese for the
Okay.
first 2 or 3 years of their lives, so that they can have those folds in their brain,
Mm-hmm.
so that when they get older, they can learn it on their own if they want, because that's such a specific language.
Oh,
Mandarin and Cantonese, so and
Manoa.
Vietnamese, yeah,
Yeah.
so specific. And not to say that nobody could learn them if you don't ever, if that wasn't your first language, but I just wanted that ingrained because I think there's something about other languages that enriches your life.
Mm-hmm.
If you could speak another language, oh my God, you just already think outside the box. If
Mm-hmm.
you could speak 2 or 3 languages, I mean, you're a different human being. So, and just growing up with some of the things that my mom said to me in Cantonese, which is very, colloquial or idiomatic of the language, like, have you eaten yet in Cantonese? You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's a very common thing that the Cantonese say to each other, which is so specific because it comes from a time where a famine, people were starving. And so when they greeted each other, they said, have you eaten yet?
Mm-hmm.
"Sik jo mei ya?" You know,
Sigdomaya. Mm-hmm.
and that means that, man, I care about you. If you haven't eaten yet, let's try to find you some food. So I taught my kids that. And then when they see my grandma back then, when they were young, before my mom died,
Mm-hmm.
it made my mom so happy that they were able to say that. So
Yeah.
that's something that I think I pass on to them, is a respect for other people's
Yeah.
languages.
Yeah, I think language also can be the barrier or the connector. And I find that one of the things I liked to do before pandemic was travel the world. And while I'm not a polyglot, like if I had a superpower, I always said like that's what I would want. I would want to be able to speak every language. And so, but you do, if you just try even just one or two words to say hello whenever you're in another country, you just find the reception you get is completely different. Like just how open people are. And you could be butchering it, but just the fact that you're trying, if it's just the word hello, goodbye, and thank you, like I always give that advice. Like if you're going to another country, just learn those three things at least and just show some respect for their culture.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And because of La Mama Theater, I have traveled to a lot of places in the world. The
Yeah.
first thing I do is learn how to say hello and thank you,
Yeah.
because that just makes them look at you and appreciate you,
Right.
and
And
because
especially as
you appreciate them.
Americans. Yeah. And as Americans, we expect everyone to speak English, which is asinine because we only have one language. I mean, you go to Europe and they all speak like 10 languages, and I feel so inadequate. It's crazy.
Americans are so ignorant. I mean, we have no borders except for Mexico, and then we don't,
Yeah, we don't. We want a bigger border. Apparently,
we
Well,
made
we
them,
don't. Some people do.
and the fact that we made them an enemy when they were actually owned most of America. It's just so racist and white supremacist.
Yeah.
They should. Why aren't they our friends like Canada?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
because they're Mexican.
Right.
It's just so racist.
Yeah, I am with you there. I love the tradition though. And being, a fellow Asian American and of Chinese culture, what are some of your favorite foods? And,
Oh my
that's a huge part of
God.
tradition. And so what kind of happens in your household?
We're fortunate to live in New York City, and
Yeah.
the things I miss about during the quarantine is I couldn't go down to Chinatown.
Yeah.
We're lucky that within our 4 city blocks, there's almost every cuisine of
Mhm.
the world. We
Yeah.
have like 4 Chinese restaurants that are great, all of different cuisines, like
Mhm.
Hunan, Shanghai, and they're all different. And then we have
Yeah.
2 different Mexican restaurants from different parts of Mexico,
Yeah,
three
I love
different
it.
Indian. I mean, it's like Ethiopian food. Everything's in our
Yes.
neighborhood. It's amazing. But I do miss dim sum.
Dim sum. Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because just going down there, it's a social thing too,
it
right?
is.
You
Yes.
all you meet your friends, they hang out, shoot the breeze. It's just the
Mhm.
best. It's just the
Yes, my father as well. I have been having to hold him back these past year because he just wants to go Yum Cha all the time. I'm
Oh
like, no,
yeah,
you can't go yet. You're not
yeah.
allowed to go yet. And so he's been vaccinated. His friend owns a restaurant, and like literally, I allowed them to go on their anniversary when the restaurant was practically
Oh,
closed. There's nobody
right.
there, and so I okayed that because everyone there was vaccinated at that point. And but he has been. It's such a social culture, right?
Completely,
It's
completely.
and that loss of connectivity has been wildly debilitating, and
Hmm.
for our mental health it's been, and so I've had to balance that out, to allow my father to be able to still live, because there's existing and there's living, and
Completely, completely.
yeah, and taking away, yum cha and dim sum, and being able to have those moments with our family has been very challenging. And I can't get him on the FaceTime. Like he doesn't like it, so, but I've been trying to stay, be connected. But yes, I'm with you there. Having all the foods and everything is always a big thing. Real quick, because I know we have to wrap up, but I love that you shared you traveled the world. What are some of your favorite places that you visited?
Oh my gosh. One of the most different places was Egypt.
Hmm.
Because it's just you see how different people are. You see how different the culture is. Doha. When you see women covered up, wrapped up, and then you only see their eyes, but then their eyes are so done up because
Hmm.
it's the only thing you see of the human body. It's like these women want to reach out and break the barriers, and the only way they can is that they get creative with their eye makeup.
Yeah.
And so you start to see like how the human desire to show themselves is so powerful. And um yeah, so just oh God, I mean it's every place I've been is so unique and different. I mean South Africa, I've been
Mhm.
into townships, the shanty towns where it's just
Yeah.
tin. I mean, to see the incredible spirit of the African people amidst that intense poverty is like it's inspiring, because you know that a lot of what we perceive as rich is made up, because
Mhm.
these people can be happy singing and dancing with almost nothing in their
Mhm.
and so that it doesn't have to be, I'm saying that it's not a tough life, but that you can find happiness in almost any situation you are, just if you don't know, like they say, ignorance, like if you don't know any better, it's great,
Yeah.
but you just have to weed out what's false, what's a false narrative, like monetary wealth or something. but
Absolutely.
I don't know, Africa, I mean, yeah, I mean, I love Asia, been all over Asia, been all
Mhm.
over Europe. I haven't been to South America, I've been to Mexico,
Mhm.
but I would say I think I would go back to Africa any day.
Mhm. Yeah, I am with you there. It's always that practicing gratitude as well when you go and you see the way other people live, especially in third world countries, and how happy they are, and
Hmm.
you go, "Wow, okay, yeah, wealth and monetary and material things don't equal happiness." And because we
No.
know a lot of wealthy miserable people.
I would say most of them are
Most
miserable.
of them are miserable. Exactly. It's like, okay, because you see pictures, you see videos, and then I've as you've been able to experience that, where it's like, wow, they're just happy, dancing in the dirt and playing in the dirt, and just these, when I was in China, the toy the little kids in the village played with was like a ball, and it was like
Mm-hmm.
the best thing. It was like the Sunday special thing they got to do, and I'm like, oh my goodness, in America kids have like thousands of toys, and it's still not enough. So yeah, that whole like, what does happiness equal? I think travel and exposure to other cultures is such a big part of helping people understand. So I'm always a proponent of having the youth go out and see other cultures. So but I'm waiting for the pandemic to kind of get through a phase where we can all travel again and be together and have dim sum and be able to experience cultures. So and
Almost there.
almost there. We're so close. I know we're almost there. But today, getting to speak with you was wonderfully enlightening and just such a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your traditions and your stories. And I'm sure our listeners also really, really appreciate it. So I really appreciate your time. And is there anything else you want to mention for me to link? I'm going to link all your stuff here so people can follow you. And of course, everybody ask for Warrior to be picked up so we can see more work. But is there anything else you'd like to mention?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Mimi, for having me. It's a privilege to share perspective and to offer different voices of Asian America. And what you're doing is really important work. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I just want to say, since you mentioned Warrior, that a lot of fans don't know what to do, and um, I think the best thing to do is to post about why Warrior is important to them with an authentic voice, and then they'll find a movement and they can hashtag and things like that. But Warrior is a very special show, and I think that if we share that with HBO Max and people at Warner Media who owns the show and say, why is this show so important to us at this moment? I mean, for me, is it tells an authentic story which can help people see us as human beings, which can affect their behavior and stop the violence. It can change culture. Now, it might not do that overnight, but we're doing it for our children, So HBO Max, Warner Media, how are you helping our children? That's just my opinion, but people should share that in a public way and with their communities, and that would be a way to do it. And it'd be a privilege to have a season 3, and we'd get deeper into things.
Absolutely.
But thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure, and hopefully you'll come back and talk to me again soon.
Yes, let's do it.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.